Hello, I'm Garrett Kane, and I am a libertarian. Libertarians believe in individual liberty and individual responsibility for their own actions as long as those actions do not hurt anyone else's person or property. I promise that I will be responsible for my own actions from what I say today, and they will not hurt your person or property. Speaking of libertarian, on one of our last episodes, I mentioned the two candidates for the Libertarian Party's president and vice presidential nomination, Joe Jorgensen for president and Spike Cohen for vice president. As with anyone in America who chooses to join a political party, there are times when their candidates say or produce or otherwise tweet or put out there in public something that they disagree with or thinks does not represent the party that they believe they are a member of. This happened recently to me with one of the campaign videos not officially produced or endorsed by the Jorgensen campaign, but featuring Spike Cohen, the vice presidential candidate. This, I think, is a good reason that we may, as a country, want to think about electing our vice president and president candidates separately versus as a ticket the way we do now. So let's get into this video, which I've included the link for in the description. I encourage you, if you'd like, to pause this video right now, go and watch the video through the link provided on the description, and then pick up with this video. Okay, welcome back. I don't know if that video made you cringe as much as it did me, but let's get into it. For the record, it was not produced by Joe Jorgensen or endorsed by Joe Jorgensen for president, but yet you saw it featured Spike Cohen. It was produced by a Facebook group called The System Is Down, and specifically Daniel Schmolt. It is titled Unblock Justice. And let me just say, in general, the thing that I'm most uncomfortable with is that I feel that it is pandering to the social justice movement, to the Black Lives and critical race theory crowd, which I think by their nature are very unlibertarian and unchristian, in that the fact that they have atheist undertones, in that they want to promote the alternative genders and bring down the normalization of assigned genders in scriptural gender roles. On the libertarian side, these groups are Marxist in that their policies require redistribution of wealth in the form of reparations for slavery, in the form of more programs that redistribute wealth through racially biased things such as affirmative action. These are in stark contrast to what libertarians say they stand for in free markets and freedom of association. So that's general. Let's get down to some of the specifics. So, mentioned early on is the term systematic racism. Later on in the video, towards the end, institutional racism. Now, I do not fully understand these terms, therefore I don't fully agree with what they are and what they describe as the problem in America. Now, I see something more accurate being symptomatic racism, in that the racism is not preemptively planned or plotted by anyone in specific, or plotted by an institution such as law enforcement, or by our Congress, or by our executive. Now, are there policies, are there bad laws that we have as a country that symptomatically produced racist results? Yes, I believe that is the case, and I believe that's what we need to deal with. So let's get into some of the other things that this video calls for. And I'm going to start in the middle with the one that I happen to agree with. The one that I happen to agree with is end the war on drugs. So this is a policy that was actually started by Teddy Roosevelt back in, I believe, 1912 with the Safe Food and Drug Act. It was escalated, though, by President Richard Nixon. And like we saw from alcohol prohibition, in this case, the proposed cure seems to be worse than the disease, in that the war on drugs has not significantly reduced the availability of illicit drugs, and through unintended consequences have caused damage to lives and livelihoods, especially in poorer and therefore minority communities. So, in understanding that I agree with that policy, it makes some of these ideas that the video calls for somewhat moot. Take civil asset forfeiture, for example. Civil asset forfeiture is a problem precipitated from the war on drugs. Should we get rid of civil asset forfeiture entirely? I don't think so. If we got rid of the war on drugs, we would end a lot of the problems with civil asset forfeiture. Yet, if a person or corporation gains capital by defrauding or robbing someone else, then those assets need to be turned over to someone. Maybe not the police, maybe the victims. But to end civil asset forfeiture entirely, I think, is a mistake. Let's move on to qualified immunity. Same general concept. Qualified immunity is a problem. It is not legislation, it is judicial precedent. And the problem with this judicial precedent is the guardrails are 10 lanes wide. So, blatant violations of civil rights by authorities or public officials are caught under this unjustly, and justice is not served. Do we throw the whole thing out the window? I don't think so, because the fact remains is that law enforcement, through the nature of their job, puts those individuals in life and death situations where they need to react fast more than almost any occupation. And to say that we can't give them a little leeway in those situations, to me, seems unfair, unjust, and just nonsensical. So yes, let's encourage the courts to take up the cases of qualified immunity, which they unfortunately decline to, or let's encourage our legislators to tighten the guardrails. So, in terms of overt civil rights violations, the police are held responsible. But in those cases where it's a snap judgment and there is some doubt as to whether or not the officers acted appropriately, they are given the benefit of doubt. Along these same lines, the video calls for ending no-knock raids. Now, the majority of no-knock raids are likely conducted in the enforcement of drug laws. Like I said, if we get rid of the war on drugs, which sounds radical, but the damage that's being done by continuing it is also radical, I think we would not need so many no-knock raids. That said, do we get rid of that option for police entirely? Picture this situation. Your child is kidnapped. The police know where your child is. They're being held by a dangerous suspect who is armed. Do you want to take away the option of that police officer to storm that property and swiftly retrieve your child and bring that person to justice? Or do you want them to be required to knock on the door and politely announce themselves first? Think about that. So, as you can see, if we just go after strategically single policies and take the option of incremental reforms on others, we can improve our situation in terms of accountable law enforcement, civil rights, and improvement of society and justice for all in general. The video ends with the quote, "Now is the time to heal," which I find ironic because the video is full of violent imagery, of violent protests, riots, also images of police brutality, which I can understand might be trying to drive home the point that we need justice reform, criminal justice reform, but to call for healing and use such violent imagery, to me, conflicts. Yes, now's the time to heal, but let's not do it with hyperbole and images of violence. Let's sit down, let's have a rational conversation, and let's figure out ways to do this without violence, without government force, together, calmly. That's all I have for today. Thanks for listening to me. It was not as bad as I thought being solo. I still can't wait to see Mel and the other people of the round table again. Till then, this is Garrett Kane for the Sophie Scholl Society, signing off.